In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of something called anonymous functions. Just highlighted here in my title, anonymous functions. And this is something that is not just used in jQuery, but of course jQuery is a JavaScript library. It's used a lot in JavaScript, but I felt like this was a good time to introduce the concept to you, since jQuery examples that you are looking at probably include a lot of anonymous functions. So in order to demonstrate anonymous functions, what I'm going to do is utilize the click event that is here in our jQuery documentation. And I'll show you, we'll demonstrate both of these examples so that way you have an idea of what an anonymous function is. All right, so let's start with this first one here that just says click, and then there's just an open and close parentheses. So let's demonstrate that one, and then we'll build up to this one that says a function. That's weird. Okay. So in my HTML page, I have something very simple. I certainly have a link to my CDN, my jQuery CDN. And then I have two input buttons. I've pre-set up some on-click events. I have this click event for this button that says click the other button. And it's running a method that a function that we haven't written yet called click button. And the click event on this second button then is to put up an alert box that says, I got clicked. So that should be working. And sure enough, I got clicked. So the idea with this, let's just run it and see what happens. Let's create this click button. All right, so I need to make sure that I'm going to do it after. I guess I have to spell script correctly. Script. Okay. And what we're going to do then is write this function. I'm just script challenged today, aren't I? Okay, so let's write this function that will generate this click event. In other words, when we click on the click the other button, it's going to trigger this button's click event. Let's just do it so that way it makes more sense. So we called it function. We called it click button. Okay, and all I'm doing is writing the function that will run when we click on this first button. So function click button, and we're going to use jQuery, so I can use the $sign to access the jQuery library. I can use the ID selector, and it's click me, gotta spell it right. So I'm accessing this button right here, trying to grab that button. So that's similar to saying get element by ID and grab this button right here, except I'm doing it in jQuery and I can do it this way. That's much easier. And I want to activate its click event. So in other words, what's happening here, and this is hard to put your hands around at first because it's such succinct code, but that's the point of jQuery. So the idea here is when we click on this button, it's going to activate this function right here. That function is going to go find the other button that we've ID'd as click me, and it's going to click it. And so therefore, by clicking on the one button, our other button should put up its alert box. So let's see if that happens. And it did. So clicking on click the other button is putting up, is by code, clicking the second button. So that's how this click works. But we've got something a little bit more complicated now. Let's look at the next option. The next syntax says that we can, there's the word function in the parentheses. So let's see how that works. Okay, so let's review the idea of a function. Let's just make sure we're clear. So when I write a function, I give it a name, some fun name, and I put parentheses in which I can receive, if I want to, some data in the form of a variable. I'll call this variable var name for no good reason. And then we put the open and closing braces. And then in here we can do whatever code we want. Like in this case, just for simplicity, I will alert the data that I receive in an alert box. And then to call that function, I could just do fun name and send the argument. I know. It's trying to help me there. It's trying to prompt it for me. A fun name, a name. I know. It keeps reloading. I'm going to have to get rid of that in a moment. But the point is, when the page loads, it's running this function here, which is sending data into a variable, and that variable is being alerted. So to keep that from popping off, let me do that. Okay, so now that we remember how a function works and how it looks, let's also remember, I'm going to add to this function just for demonstration. Let's see. Let me add a paragraph. I'm just going to copy and paste some code in just to save some time. I'm going to copy in a paragraph that has an ID of fade out. And I've got all this lorem ipsum text, which is just Latin text to serve as a filler. So just for demonstration, so I've got all this text here. And so now what I'm going to do is, just for a reminder, I'm going to take that, let me just type it out, I'm going to get that paragraph, fade by ID, and I'm going to use this method called hide. Okay, and so now what I'm doing is when I click on this button, it's doing two things in this function. We've already seen this click event. It's going to click the second button, but it should also fade out our paragraph. So let's see that happening. I got clicked and the paragraph went away. Remember that also, because we have these parentheses, that sometimes means we can send additional data to make that method behave differently, for example. So here, if I put in a value of 3000, then that's milliseconds, so it's going to click and then hide over 3 seconds. Okay, so that's kind of just a review. I know that this all sounds familiar to you, but I was trying to give you an overview so that way hopefully the next thing makes more sense. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize that click parenthesis function thing and see what that's all about. So let's see, let's make another button just for demonstration. I'm going to copy and paste because I'm not good at typing while I'm talking, and so therefore I've got it all laid out ahead of time. So I'm creating a third button that's called fade paragraph, and you can guess that I'm going to work on fading this paragraph. I've given it an ID of fade paragraph, but I haven't given it a click event or anything, so we're going to do all of that with code, with jQuery code. So what I'm going to do now is utilize what we saw in that syntax, where I'm going to use the selector of this ID right here. So when we click on that, so I'll select that button by ID, fade paragraph, just spelling P-R-A-G-R-A-P-H. Okay, so then I'm going to utilize the click. And remember that the option said that I could give it a function. So first of all, that's a complete sentence, but let's see how function works. Well, it turns out that similar to how we sent data in this method, we can send this method a function, which is kind of a new thing. So we can send a function as an argument. What? Okay, so in other words, remember here is a full function, right? So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to put it inside. Let me move this down for clarity. Okay, so I haven't added anything, I've just moved things around. And here I'm going to put a control V. Okay, so the idea here is that I'm actually sending a function as an argument. And here is the function. Kind of a new concept, right? The only difference now is usually when we send it inside as an argument, we don't really need to call it anything, because when we give it a name, that means we can call it at another time. But I'm not needing to call it at another time. I'm calling it right this moment. And so therefore, I don't have to give it a name. Hence this term, anonymous function. So I am on this click event sending an anonymous function that can do things. And that anonymous function then has to behave or is encapsulated in my parentheses as if it was just data, but it's in full syntax. So in here, I might do something like, let's see, I'm not going to send it any variables. We'll deal with those later. So let's do something different. Let's fade out that paragraph. So, we could just do this. We'll just copy this over. Okay. So now we'll allow this button to generate this. And maybe when we're done, we'll say, I have faded. Alert. I have faded. So let's see this work and then go back and revisit it. So now when we click on Fade Paragraph, I have faded, and we'll see it fade. Okay. So the idea then behind a function then, and usually what you'll see is the anonymous function. Okay, so usually what you'll see is I'm just getting rid of white spaces, but generally when you see it in documentation now, you're going to see it like this. So the idea here is, and you have to kind of do that eye illusion, look at it in different ways, but now the idea here is that I have this click method with an opening and closing parentheses. And inside of those parentheses, I'm sending an argument, which is complete in syntax with the opening and closing curly braces and all of the code that I want to run inside as an argument. So I know that's a new concept, but it's commonly used in JavaScript. So this is the idea, and we'll see more examples of this. This is an idea of sending an anonymous function as an argument.